We moved into this house 5 years ago because it was the best home we could afford in our price range at the time, especially with the amenities, the commute, etc. And it looked nice, like the sort of neighborhood where people minded their own business. What we didn't quite grasp at the time, buried in the 47-page HOA document we signed without much thought, was how seriously the board took its idea of visual continuity. I thought it meant no pink houses or jungle gyms in the front yard. I didn't realize it extended to things like doorbell placement, mulch tone, and as I would soon find out, small black security cameras. Last summer, someone rifled through our car in the middle of the night. Nothing major was taken, unless you count the travel phone charger and the new floor mats, but it left a bad feeling. Ours wasn't the only house hit that week either. A neighbor down the street had their mailbox pried open. Someone else found footprints in their flower bed. None of it made the evening news, but it was enough to make us feel uneasy. So we bought 2 compact wireless, designed to be unobtrusive security cameras. One faced the front door, the other overlooked the driveway. They were hardly noticeable unless you were looking for them, and even then, you'd have to squint. 4 days later, we got a letter from the HOA. Exterior alteration installed without prior approval. Violation of Section 4.2. Devices must not be visible from the street. I reread it twice. It felt like a joke, except there was a deadline and the promise of a fine if we didn't comply. I called the HOA office. A woman named Connie answered. She sounded polite, in that crisp, clipped way that tells you the answer will be no before you've asked the question. I explained what we'd installed. I mentioned the break-ins. I said we were happy to fill out whatever paperwork they needed. You'll need to submit a modification request for review, she said. Approval isn't guaranteed, of course. Cameras can impact the neighborhood's aesthetic. Still, I complied. I filled out the form, submitted pictures, included the model number, and even noted that the cameras were pointed solely at our property. A few neighbors who had heard what happened wrote short notes in support. A few weeks later, denied. The devices are visible from the street and may compromise visual uniformity. I looked up and down the block. One house had a wreath the size of a hula hoop. Another had an American flag sunshade in every window. But sure, our 2 matchbook-sized cameras were the problem. What made it worse? We later learned 3 board members had cameras of their own. Same style, same placement. When I asked Connie, she said those were installed before the current policy and had been grandfathered in. By that point, it wasn't about cameras anymore. It was about principle. I wasn't the only one annoyed. A few other residents had been turned down for simple things. Solar-powered lights, a bench on the porch, a planter that wasn't HOA-approved beige. So we organized. Quietly, respectfully. We gathered signatures and petitioned for a vote to amend the rules. Security cameras allowed, within specific size and placement guidelines. Nothing outrageous. To the board's credit, they agreed to hold the vote, and narrowly, the amendment passed. We reinstalled the cameras. The HOA still charged us the $50 fine for unauthorized modification, which felt a bit petty, but we paid it. Some hills aren't worth dying on. But now I wonder just who was behind the break-ins. What was who trying to protect? Does anyone else think it seemed a little suspicious that the HOA tried to prevent me from installing security cameras? Now, when I get a motion alert in the middle of the night, I check the feed half expecting to see one of the board members sneaking about like a cartoon villain.